The Forbidden Contact. The royal throne hall of Xyrrak Prime was a place of great power and fear. The walls shined like liquid silver, reflecting the cold light from the floating crystal chandeliers. Tall, armored guards stood like statues, their dark eyes watching every movement. At the center of the hall, sitting on a throne made of black obsidian, was Empress Xyrrak, ruler of the Xylian Empire. Her long silver robes shimmered like a galaxy, and her golden eyes burned with authority. No being in the universe dared to disrespect her, until today. Before her, standing with a calm expression, was a human, Captain Leon Carter, a man of Earth, a species considered unclean, chaotic, and dangerous by the Xylians. The room was filled with tension. The Xylian nobles, standing in the shadows, whispered among themselves. No human had ever stood this close to the Empress. And now one was here, acting as if he belonged in their sacred palace. Empress Xyrrak narrowed her eyes. "You are bold to stand before me, human." Her voice was smooth but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. Carter met her gaze, showing no fear. "I came for peace, Your Majesty. The war between our people has lasted long enough." "Peace." Xyrrak let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Humans do not bring peace. They bring chaos and destruction." Carter sighed. He had heard this before. The Xylians viewed humans as reckless creatures, always acting without thinking. They believed humans spread violence like a disease. Still, he had to try. "We don't have to be enemies," Carter said. "We can share knowledge, technology, trade routes between our empires cold." The Empress raised her hand, and the guards clashed their weapons against the ground, silencing him. "You misunderstand, human," she said coldly. "Your kind is weak. You build alliances through desperation, not wisdom. You speak of trade, yet your people have taken what is not theirs." Carter clenched his jaw, but stayed calm. He knew negotiating with Xylians was dangerous. One wrong word, and he could be executed. Xyrrak leaned forward slightly, studying him. "You are lucky I allowed you into my court at all." Carter took a deep breath. He had to show strength. Xylians respected strength. "I didn't come here to beg, Empress. I came here because I believe both our species can survive better together than apart." A long silence followed. The Empress's golden eyes seemed to look into his soul, searching for weakness. Then something unexpected happened. A faint whistle echoed in the hall. A sudden zap of energy shot through the air. One of the Xylian attendants gasped and collapsed, their robe burning at the edge. An assassin's plasma dart had been fired. The guards reacted instantly, pulling out their energy weapons and scanning the hall for the attacker. But something even worse happened. Carter felt a push from behind. His instinct kicked in. He moved quickly, his military training taking over. He reached out, and his hand touched the Empress's arm. The world froze. The entire court went silent. The Empress stiffened, her golden eyes going wide with shock and horror. Carter quickly stepped back, realizing his mistake. His heart pounded. The Xylian guards raised their weapons, aiming directly at him. A noble in the crowd screamed, "The human Tojichi here." "No," another gasped. "This cannot be. It is forbidden." Carter barely had time to react before the Empress gasped loudly. A strange golden light flickered around her body. Her breath shuddered, her fingers trembling as she stared at her own hands. She looked at Carter, eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Fear. Carter stepped forward, concerned. "Are you?" The Empress collapsed. The guards charged forward, tackling Carter to the ground. His head hit the cold floor as armored hands pinned him down. "You fool!" One of the nobles shouted. "You have cursed her." "What?" Carter struggled, but the guards forced his arms behind his back. A Xylian healer rushed to the Empress's side. She was breathing, but her skin was glowing faintly. A strange, unfamiliar energy pulsed through her veins. "The human's touch," the healer whispered in horror. "It has changed her." The nobles backed away, whispering words of fear and superstition. One of the high priests stepped forward, his face grim. "This is an ancient omen, a bond never seen for 1,000 years. The Empress's life force has been linked to the humans." The words sent shockwaves through the court. Carter, still held down, felt the blood drain from his face. "What the hell does that mean?" he asked, his voice tight. The priest turned to him, eyes filled with cold certainty. "It means, human, if you die, she dies too." The hall erupted in chaos. Carter's heart pounded. This was not how the mission was supposed to go. And from where she lay on the ground, Empress Ferelia's fingers twitched. Her golden eyes flickered open, filled with something even worse than anger. Pure horror. The curse awakens. The prison cell was dark, cold, and unwelcoming. Captain Leon Carter sat against the metal wall, his hands bound in energy restraints that hummed softly with power. He had been locked away deep within the royal dungeons of Xyrrak Prime, where few ever emerged alive. His mind replayed the events from the throne room over and over. The Empress, the touch, the collapse. And now, the entire Xylian court believed he had somehow cursed their ruler. Carter exhaled, shaking his head. "Hell of a first impression," he muttered. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. The air in the dungeon was thick with tension. Soon, a squad of Xylian royal guards appeared, their armor reflecting the dim blue light of the corridor. They moved aside, and High Priest Xyrrak stepped forward. The priest's long silver robes trailed behind him, and his violet eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. His gaze on Carter was filled with pure disgust. "The human lives," Xyrrak murmured. His voice was quiet but sharp, like a knife sliding out of its sheath. "Yeah, I get that a lot," Carter said dryly. Xyrrak didn't react to the sarcasm. Instead, he took a slow step forward. "You touched the Empress," he said. Carter sighed. "It wasn't on purpose. Someone tried to assassinate her. I reacted." "You should have let her die," Xyrrak replied coldly. Carter frowned. "Excuse me." The priest studied him for a long moment. Then he took out a small, ancient-looking device from his sleeve. A strange holographic script flickered over it. He raised the device, and suddenly, a searing pain shot through Carter's entire body. His muscles locked up, his vision blurred, and for a few agonizing seconds, he felt like he was burning from the inside. Then, just as suddenly, the pain stopped. Carter gasped, struggling to breathe. His body was drenched in sweat. He stared at the priest, his jaw clenched. "The Empress," Xyrrak whispered, "felt that too." Carter's stomach dropped. "You're lying," he said, but doubt crept into his voice. Xyrrak smirked. "I see it now. You don't fully understand, do you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The moment you touched her, something ancient awakened within the Empress. A connection never meant to exist between our kind and yours." Carter remained silent, waiting for the real answer. Xyrrak watched him carefully, then continued. "You and the Empress are now bound. Your life forces are linked. If one of you feels pain, the other does too. If one of you dies." He let the words linger. Carter swallowed hard. "So if I drop dead, the Empress will share your fate?" Carter let out a bitter laugh. "Well, that explains why I'm still breathing." Xyrrak's expression darkened. "For now." At that moment, the door at the far end of the dungeon hissed open. A new figure entered. The air grew heavier. The guards immediately stepped aside, lowering their heads in deep respect. Even Xyrrak stiffened. Carter looked up. It was her, Empress Ferelia. She walked forward, her presence alone demanding obedience. The long silver robes of her royal house trailed behind her like flowing stardust. Her golden eyes blazed with fury, but something else hid beneath the anger. Carter could see it. Unease, fear, confusion. Xyrrak bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, you should not be here. The human is Silence, Varelia snapped. Xyrrak immediately stepped back. The Empress stood before Carter, staring at him as if he were some unsolvable puzzle. You? Her voice was cold, filled with barely contained fury. What have you done to me? Carter looked at her, still catching his breath from the earlier pain. I'd love to say it's my charming personality, he said, but I have no idea. Her hands clenched into fists. I feel you. Carter raised an eyebrow. Not the worst thing a woman has ever said to me. The guards tensed, some even reached for their weapons. But the Empress ignored his sarcasm. When you were in pain, she said through gritted teeth, I felt it. When you breathe, I feel it. Even now, standing before you, something inside me reacts. Carter's smirk faded. This wasn't just some superstitious nonsense. It was real. The Empress took a slow breath, then turned to Xyrrak. Break this bond. Xyrrak hesitated. Your Majesty, the old scrolls speak of no way to undo such a link. Varelia's voice turned to ice. Then find one. The High Priest bowed low. As you command. The Empress turned back to Carter. Until this abomination is undone, you will remain in my palace. You will be under guard at all times. And if you attempt to harm me in any way, note this. Her golden eyes burned with warning. I will find a way to kill you, even if it means I die as well. Carter met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. I'll try to keep you alive, Your Majesty, he said, but I'd really prefer we didn't test that theory. For the first time, something like doubt flickered in her expression. She turned sharply. Guards, bring him to the royal wing. Carter frowned. The royal wing. I thought I was a prisoner. She didn't even look back. You are. The doors slammed shut behind her. And for the first time, Carter realized the full weight of his situation. This wasn't just a diplomatic failure. This was a death sentence waiting to happen. The reluctant alliance. Carter stood by the massive window of the royal wing, staring out at the alien city beneath him. Xyrak Prime was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Floating structures, golden towers that stretched into the sky, and roads that pulsed with a strange blue energy. From this high up, he could see the city's heartbeat, the rhythm of an empire that despised his very existence. He sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. A prisoner in a palace. Not the worst situation he had ever been in, but certainly the most dangerous. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft hiss. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Empress Varelia. She entered the room with her usual commanding presence, flanked by 2 Xylian guards in obsidian black armor. Their hands rested on their weapons, ready to kill him the moment she gave the order. But Carter knew she wouldn't. She couldn't. Not without dying herself. Human. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Carter smirked at the title. Still no first names, huh? We've been through a lot together, you and I. The Empress's golden eyes flashed with irritation. Do not mistake this for anything more than what it is. She took a step closer, keeping her distance, as if the very air around him was contaminated. You are still my prisoner. The only reason you breathe is because of this curse. Carter turned, crossing his arms. Right. The curse. The bond. Whatever you want to call it. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. You don't look cursed to me. The Empress tensed, something flickering in her gaze. Was it doubt? Unease? He wasn't sure. Then she straightened, her face returning to its usual cold mask. The high priests are searching for a way to sever our connection, she said. Until then, you will obey me. Carter chuckled. Obey you? And if I don't? She didn't hesitate. Then I will make your life a living nightmare. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Your Majesty, I get it. You don't want this any more than I do. But until we fix this, we might as well work together. The Empress's expression hardened. Work together? You assume we are equals. We kind of are now, Carter said, raising an eyebrow. You kill me, you die. You hurt me, you feel it. Like it or not, we're partners in this mess. For the first time, she had no immediate response. The room fell into silence. The guards shifted slightly, uncomfortable in the presence of such a bold human. Then, the door slid open again. High Priest Xyrrak entered, his violet eyes dark with tension. He bowed slightly before speaking. Your Majesty, I bring urgent news. The Empress turned to him, her tone sharp. Speak. Xyrrak hesitated, then said, There has been an attempt on the human's life. Carter's smirk faded. Well, that's not surprising. Varelia frowned. By whom? The High Priest glanced at Carter before speaking carefully. We are still investigating, but we suspect it was someone within the royal court. There are factions that do not approve of your connection to this human. Carter exhaled. Shocking. The Empress's jaw tightened. Find out who was responsible. Xyrrak bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. But there is more. She narrowed her eyes. What? Xyrrak hesitated, then turned toward Carter. The bond is changing. Carter's stomach dropped. What do you mean, changing? Xyrrak's gaze was unreadable. We do not fully understand the nature of the connection, but our scholars believe that the longer you and the Empress remain bound, the deeper it will grow. The air in the room suddenly felt too heavy. The Empress's voice was dangerously low. Explain. Xyrrak took a slow breath. At first, the bond only linked your physical pain. But soon, it may evolve. Your thoughts, your emotions, your very essence, it may become something neither of you can control. A long, tense silence followed. Carter and the Empress locked eyes. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. Carter let out a nervous chuckle. So what? We're gonna start reading each other's minds. Xyrrak shook his head. It is possible. But if the bond continues to grow unchecked, you and the Empress may become more than connected. He met Varelia's gaze, his next words slow and deliberate. You may become one. The Empress visibly stiffened. Carter felt his heartbeat quicken. Absolutely not, Varelia hissed. This will not happen. Xyrrak hesitated. It may be inevitable. Carter exhaled, trying to process everything. All right, he said, shaking his head. That's enough freaky magic talk for one day. Let's just focus on staying alive, yeah. The Empress shot him a glare. Do not assume we are allies, human. Carter sighed. Right. Not allies. Just two people who can't kill each other. He smirked. Sounds like the start of a great friendship. Varelia turned on her heel. Guards, take him to the strategy chamber. If he must exist in my palace, then he will be useful. Carter grinned. Finally, a job. She stopped at the door, her voice quiet but firm. Do not make me regret this. With that, she left, her presence lingering in the air like a storm. Carter exhaled, rubbing his face. This just keeps getting better. But deep down, a dangerous thought crept into his mind. What if the bond could never be broken? And worse, what if he didn't want it to be? The hidden enemy. The royal strategy chamber was a circular room made of polished obsidian, its walls lined with holographic displays that flickered with star maps, fleet formations, and encrypted battle reports. The air smelled of burning incense, a tradition carried out before every major council meeting. Carter stood near the edge of the massive circular war table, feeling the weight of the moment. Around him, high-ranking Xylian generals, ministers, and strategists stood at attention, awaiting their ruler's arrival. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Empress Varelia strode inside, her presence commanding immediate silence. All Xylians bowed deeply. Carter, as usual, did not. He simply crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. So what's the plan? More death glares. Maybe another assassination attempt. Varelia's golden eyes flickered with irritation, but she ignored him. Instead, she turned to her war council. The high priest believes the assassin came from within the palace, she said. Someone powerful. Someone who does not want peace with the humans. Carter folded his arms. So, someone who also doesn't mind getting you killed in the process. A deep silence followed his words. One of the Xylian generals, an older warrior with sharp blue eyes, spoke. Perhaps they believe the bond will break upon your death, Empress. Xyrrak, standing nearby, shook his head. If the assassin had succeeded, we do not know what the consequences would have been. His violet eyes darkened. But I suspect it would have only doomed her faster. Virelia tensed slightly, but her face betrayed no emotion. Then we must root out the traitor before they try again. Carter sighed. You know, where I come from, an assassination attempt on the head of state usually means it's time for some serious house cleaning. The Empress shot him a sharp look. I am not a human ruler. My people do not panic. Carter smirked. Yeah. Tell that to the guy who just tried to kill me. The Empress turned to her council. We will tighten security across all levels of the palace. Every noble, every minister, every warrior will be investigated. One of the generals, a tall Xylian female with deep purple skin, spoke. The Order of Purity will not take this lightly, Empress. Carter perked up. The order of what now? The Empress hesitated for half a second, a tiny pause that most wouldn't notice. But Carter did. They are a faction of my people, she said carefully. Traditionalists. They believe Xylians are superior to all other races, and that any contact with lesser species, especially humans, is an abomination. Carter let out a low whistle. Wow. Sounds like a fun group. They were small before, Xyrrak added. But now, with your presence, their numbers grow. They see you as a threat to our way of life. Carter exhaled. Great. A bunch of alien supremacists want me dead. Just another Tuesday. The Empress looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Then she turned to her guards. Double the watch on the human. If he dies, I die. And I do not intend to die. Carter smirked. Glad to know I'm valuable. Virelia's gaze turned cold. Do not mistake necessity for care, human. Before Carter could reply, a new voice interrupted. Then let us see how strong your necessity truly is. The air crackled. And then, the chamber exploded into chaos. The betrayal. From the shadows, a group of masked figures lunged forward. Blades of pure energy ignited in their hands, slashing at guards and ministers alike. The Order of Purity had infiltrated the palace. Carter moved on instinct. He grabbed the nearest Xylian soldier's fallen weapon and fired blindly into the chaos. The energy blast struck one assassin in the chest, sending them crashing against the wall. Virelia barely had time to react before two assassins charged directly at her. She drew her own weapon, a long curved blade that shimmered with royal energy, and met them head-on. Blades clashed, sparks flying. The Empress was fast, her movements fluid and lethal. She dodged the first assassin's attack, countering with a precise slash across the chest. But there were too many. Carter saw it before she did. Another assassin, coming from behind. He moved without thinking. In one swift motion, he tackled the Empress out of the way, just as the assassin's blade slashed toward her throat. Pain exploded through Carter's side as the energy blade sliced into him instead. He gritted his teeth, his vision flashing white. And then he heard her. A gasp. Not his. Hers. Carter turned his head. Virelia had staggered back, clutching her side, her breath unsteady. The bond. She felt the wound. Carter forced a grin, despite the pain. Guess you really can't live without me, huh? Virelia's golden eyes blazed with fury. Without a word, she turned back to the assassins. But now, her attacks were twice as aggressive. Her blade moved like lightning, cutting down anyone who dared stand in her way. The remaining assassins, realizing their mistake, began to retreat. But the Empress was done showing mercy. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned a wave of raw energy, sending the last attacker crashing into the wall. The battle was over. The Order of Purity had failed. But Carter barely registered the victory. His legs gave out, and the room tilted sideways. Pain. So much pain. And then, darkness. Awakening. Carter's eyes blinked open slowly. He was lying on a soft surface. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, dark, elegant. A palace chamber. A warm pressure rested on his arm. He turned his head slightly and found her, Empress Virilia, sitting beside his bed, watching him. For the first time, she didn't look angry. Carter groaned, shifting slightly. If this is the afterlife, I gotta say, I expected more lights and angelic music. Virelia's lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. You are insufferable, she said, voice softer than before. Carter smirked. And yet, here you are, keeping me alive. The Empress stood, her golden eyes unreadable. Do not mistake this for kindness, human. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she hesitated. Then, without looking back, she spoke. You saved my life. And then she was gone. Carter lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The bond was growing. The Empress was changing. And for the first time, he wondered, was this really just a curse? Or something much, much more? A bond strengthened in battle. The pain had lessened, but it was still there, a dull throb in Carter's side, a reminder of how close he had come to dying in that throne room. He lay on the medical bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, his mind racing. The Order of Purity had made their move. They had failed. But they would try again. Carter exhaled and shifted, testing his injuries. The wound on his side was deep, but healing faster than expected, thanks to Cillian medical technology. Even so, his body felt heavier, like he had carried something invisible from that fight. Something unspoken had passed between him and the Empress when he took the hit for her. The bond. It wasn't just keeping them alive together anymore. It was doing something more. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Empress Virilia stood in the doorway. Unlike before, she wasn't flanked by guards. She wasn't in her royal robes, either, just a dark battle uniform, a long cape draped over one shoulder. Her golden eyes scanned him with an unreadable expression. Carter smirked. Twice in one day. I must be special. She didn't rise to the bait. Get up, human. Carter raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure I got stabbed saving your life. You could at least say thank you. The Empress's gaze hardened. I did not come for pleasantries. You are leaving this chamber. Carter sat up slowly. Oh, where am I going? Execution chamber. Another prison. She stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. For the first time, he noticed something in her expression. Not just annoyance. Something deeper. A flicker of hesitation. The attack proves what I already knew, she said. You are a liability. Carter scoffed. Thanks for that. She ignored him. If you are to survive, I must make sure you can defend yourself. Carter blinked. Wait, you're saying. I am taking you into the combat arena. His smirk disappeared. The arena of Xyrrak Prime. The arena was massive, an open battlefield carved into the heart of the palace, surrounded by towering walls of black metal and rows of Cillian warriors standing in silence. It was a training ground for the elite, where warriors honed their skills in battle simulations that prepared them for real war. But this wasn't just any training. This was a test. Carter stood in the center of the arena, watching as a dozen Cillian warriors stepped forward, forming a circle around him. Their armor gleamed under the artificial lights, their weapons humming with raw energy. On a raised platform above them, Virilia stood watching. Her face was expressionless, her golden eyes unreadable. Carter exhaled, and rolled his shoulders. So I'm guessing this isn't just a friendly spar. Varelia's voice rang out across the arena. No, it is a lesson. A Xylian warrior lunged. Carter moved on instinct, ducking as a plasma blade slashed through the air where his head had been. They were fast. Too fast. Carter barely had time to raise his stolen Xylian combat staff before another warrior attacked, swinging down with enough force to crack bone. Carter blocked. Barely. His arms shook under the impact. Then, another warrior struck from the side. Carter dodged just in time, but a third one hit him in the back with the blunt side of their weapon, sending him staggering forward. Laughter echoed from the watching warriors. Carter gritted his teeth. This wasn't training. It was humiliation. Varelia's voice rang out. You wanted to prove yourself, human. Now fight. Carter exhaled sharply, ignoring the burning in his muscles. All right, fine. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. The fight turns. The next warrior lunged, and this time, Carter didn't just dodge, he countered. He grabbed the warrior's arm, twisting it at the last second, forcing the Xylian into their own attacker's blade. The crowd gasped. Carter didn't hesitate. He spun, using his momentum to strike another warrior across the chest with his staff. They staggered back, caught off guard. Another charged at him. Carter let his instincts take over. He ducked under the strike, slid to the side, and swept the warrior's legs out from under them. The impact sent dust flying. The Xylians, watching, stiffened. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. Carter turned his gaze toward Varelia. She wasn't smirking. She wasn't mocking. She was watching. And for the first time, she looked like she was considering something new. Then, a voice interrupted. Enough. A new figure entered the arena. A Xylian noble, draped in ceremonial armor, his violet eyes glowing with cold hatred. Lord Xyrrak. The warriors around Carter parted immediately. Carter exhaled, adjusting his grip on the combat staff. Let me guess. Another assassination attempt. Xyrrak smiled thinly. No. A challenge. He turned to the Empress and bowed. Your Majesty, the human has no place in our world. If you truly believe he is worth keeping, then let him prove it. Varelia's face remained unreadable. And how do you propose he do that? Xyrrak unsheathed his blade, a serrated Xylian longsword glowing with raw energy. A duel, he said. The arena fell into stunned silence. Carter raised an eyebrow. Oh, great. A death match. Fantastic. Xyrrak smirked. You are unworthy of standing at the Empress's side. I will see to it personally. Carter turned his gaze to Varelia. She held his stare for a long moment. Then, she nodded. The decision had been made. Carter sighed, rolling his shoulders. Fine. If they wanted a fight to the death, so be it. Xyrrak's smirk widened. Try not to die too quickly, human. Carter gripped his weapon tighter. I was about to say the same thing to you. The crowd roared. The duel had begun. The truth of the bond. The Xylian battle arena pulsed with raw energy. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of hundreds of watching eyes pressing down on Carter like an invisible force. He tightened his grip on the combat staff, rolling his shoulders as he faced his opponent, Lord Xyrrak, one of the Empress's most ruthless warlords. The noble's serrated Xylian longsword shimmered with lethal energy, humming softly as he twirled it in his grip. Above them, on the royal balcony, Empress Varelia watched. Her expression was unreadable, but Carter could feel her eyes on him. His fingers tingled. His heart pounded. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to prove that he deserved to exist in this world. Xyrrak smirked. Ready to die, human. Carter exhaled. I'd ask you the same, but I don't think you'd like the answer. The arena fell silent. Then, Xyrrak attacked. The duel begins. Carter barely dodged the first strike. The Xylian noble moved like a phantom, his sword slicing through the air so fast it was almost invisible. Carter leaped back, barely managing to parry the next attack with his staff. The impact shook his arms to the bone. Xyrrak was stronger, faster, more experienced. But Carter wasn't defenseless. He rolled to the side, dodging a downward slash that would have split him in two. The moment his feet hit the ground, he twisted and swung his staff toward Xyrrak's side. The noble blocked with ease. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he slammed the butt of his sword into Carter's stomach. Pain exploded through his ribs. Carter stumbled back, gasping for breath. The crowd laughed. Xyrrak sneered. Pathetic. Carter gritted his teeth. He wiped blood from his lip and forced himself to breathe. He wasn't out yet. The bond reacts. Then, it happened. A jolt surged through his body, electric and unnatural. His vision blurred, his muscles tensed. And suddenly, he could feel something else. Not just the pain. Something outside of himself. The sensation was foreign yet familiar, like an instinct buried deep inside him suddenly waking up. His fingers twitched. His breath slowed. His body felt connected. And then, in a single heartbeat, Carter understood. It wasn't his pain he was feeling. It was hers. Empress Varelia stiffens. On the royal balcony, Varelia's hands clenched involuntarily. A faint, almost imperceptible pain pricked at her ribs, the exact spot where Carter had been hit moments ago. Her golden eyes narrowed. The bond was growing. She could feel more than just his pain now. She could feel him. His frustration, his exhaustion, his determination. It was spreading, deepening. This wasn't just a curse. It was something far more dangerous. Something she could no longer ignore. The turning point. In the arena, Carter felt the shift. The connection between him and the Empress wasn't just a survival mechanism anymore. It was something primal, something raw. And it was feeding him. He suddenly moved faster. His arms no longer ached with exhaustion. His reflexes sharpened, his senses heightened. It was as if something else was guiding him. Xyrrak lunged. This time, Carter didn't just block, he countered. He sidestepped, narrowly dodging the blade, and before Xyrrak could recover, Carter spun and slammed his staff into the Xylian's side. Xyrrak staggered back, shocked. The crowd gasped. Carter didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, landing strike after strike, forcing Xyrrak into defensive mode. The noble growled in frustration. "You're cheating, human." Carter smirked. "No, I'm winning." Xyrrak snarled and charged, swinging wildly. Carter ducked under the attack and slammed his staff into Xyrrak's wrist. The noble cried out, dropping his sword. The weapon clattered to the ground. Silence fell over the arena. The Xylian warriors stared. Carter stood over Xyrrak, breathing heavily, his staff raised, ready to end it. Xyrrak looked up at him, eyes burning with rage and disbelief. For the first time, a human had bested a Xylian in combat. Above them, on the balcony, Varelia remained still, but her heart pounded, because she knew the truth. That wasn't just Carter fighting. It was the bond. And it was growing stronger every second. Aftermath. The duel was over. Carter stood in the palace chambers, his body sore but victorious. He had won. Xyrrak had stormed away in fury. The Xylian warriors still glared at him in disbelief. But none of that mattered now, because Varelia stood before him, watching him closely. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, she spoke. "The bond. It is not a curse, is it?" Carter exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "No, it's something else." A beat of silence. Then, for the first time, the Empress looked at him not with hatred, but with something far more dangerous. Curiosity, and perhaps something even deeper. Carter smirked. "Admit it. You're impressed." Varelia rolled her eyes and walked away. But Carter noticed something. For the first time, she didn't look disgusted by his presence. And for the first time, Carter realized he didn't want the bond to break anymore. The rise of the Empress and the human champion. The Xylian palace halls were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Carter moved cautiously, his steps light on the obsidian floors, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The massive corridors, once filled with the Empress's advisors, guards, and nobles, were now empty. The usual hum of the energy reactors that powered the palace felt muted, the air heavy with tension. Something was coming. And it wasn't good. A voice crackled in his ear, one of the few Xylians who had grudgingly allied with him. "Human, listen carefully. The Order of Purity is making their final move." Carter's jaw tightened. So this was it. The coup had begun. The Empress under siege. Across the palace, in the Grand Throne Chamber, Empress Varelia stood tall. She was surrounded. The once loyal royal guards had turned against her, their weapons raised. The high-ranking nobles who had sworn fealty to her empire now stood with the Order of Purity, their faces cold with betrayal. And at the center of it all, standing just before the throne, was Lord Xyrrak. He smirked, his violet eyes gleaming with triumph. "It's over, Empress," Xyrrak said smoothly, stepping forward. "You have let weakness infect our empire for too long. You've allowed a human to stand in our halls, to fight among us, to humiliate our warriors." Varelia said nothing, but her fingers curled into fists of barely controlled fury. Xyrrak continued, his voice turning cruel. "You are unfit to rule. Your bond to the human has made you impure." The Order of Purity warriors raised their weapons. "You will surrender the throne," Xyrrak declared, "or die by Xylian hands." The Empress's golden eyes burned. Then she said, calmly but dangerously, "Kill me, and your entire bloodline dies with me." The noble stiffened. The truth was undeniable. If she died, so did the human. And no one knew what would happen to the bond's energy after that. It could destroy anyone connected to it. A moment of hesitation. Xyrrak's smirk faltered, but then, with cold certainty, he lifted his weapon. "The bond was an accident," he said. "And accidents can be corrected." He stepped forward, and just as he raised his blade, the doors to the throne chamber burst open. The human strikes back. A blast of energy shot across the room, striking two traitorous guards. They crumpled to the floor. Xyrrak spun in shock as Carter strode into the chamber, his weapon still smoking. "Sorry I'm late," Carter said, his voice casual but his stance ready for war. "Took me a while to figure out which backstabbing noble was going to try this first." Xyrrak sneered. "You're outnumbered." Carter smirked. "Am I?" Then the palace shook. Explosions rumbled through the walls as Xylian warships descended from the sky. The Empress's loyal forces had returned. Carter tilted his head. "Looks like you didn't plan this as well as you thought." Xyrrak snarled and lunged. The fight for the empire had begun. The battle for the throne. The chamber erupted into chaos. Carter dodged Xyrrak's first strike, spinning and kicking the noble square in the chest. The Xylian staggered back, furious. The Empress moved like lightning, cutting down her former guards with swift, precise strikes. Even outnumbered, she was deadly. Carter fought his way toward her, every instinct screaming that they had to end this quickly. Xyrrak attacked again, his blade arcing toward Carter's throat. Carter blocked, twisting under the strike, and slammed his fist into Xyrrak's side. The noble grunted in pain, but recovered fast. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," Xyrrak hissed. Carter grinned. "You still can't." The Empress turned her head for a split second, her eyes meeting Carter's. And that's when it happened. The bond reacted. A surge of pure energy rippled through both of them. Carter felt it. Varelia felt it. Suddenly, they weren't just connected by pain. They were moving together. When Carter sidestepped, the Empress did the same. When she swung her blade, Carter knew exactly where it would land, before it even happened. They were fighting as one. Xyrrak saw it too. His expression turned from rage to fear. This is unnatural, he snarled. Carter smirked. Tell me about it. Then, as if on instinct, he and the Empress struck together. Carter's staff slammed into Xyrrak's arm, disarming him. Varelia's blade sliced across his chest, sending him crashing to the floor. Xyrrak gasped, clutching his wound. The rest of the traitors hesitated. The Empress turned to the nobles who had betrayed her. Her voice was like steel. Your rebellion has failed. The remaining traitors dropped their weapons. The battle was over. The throne was hers. The aftermath. Hours later, the Xylian palace was restored to order. The traitors were arrested. The order of purity had collapsed. Carter stood in the Empress's private chamber, rolling his sore shoulder. You know, he said, for an empire that thinks humans are weak, I seem to be doing a lot of saving your lives. Varelia studied him for a long moment. Then, in an unexpected move, she stepped closer. Something has changed, she murmured. The bond. It's no longer just pain. It's something more. Carter raised an eyebrow. You sound concerned. The Empress hesitated, just for a second. Then she turned away, composing herself. We will continue to study it. Carter smirked. You mean we're stuck with each other? She sighed. It appears so. A long silence. Then, just before she left the room, she glanced over her shoulder. For what it's worth, you fought well today. Carter blinked. Then he grinned. Is that a compliment? Varelia rolled her eyes. Do not get used to it, human. She walked away. Carter watched her go, his smirk slowly fading into something more thoughtful. Because deep down, he knew the truth. The bond was no longer just survival. It was evolving. And the real question was, into what?